Welcome back to another episode of Backstage with Next Stage. I'm your host, Candace Rawls. I'm also the marketing manager here, and I'm joined by my two lovely colleagues, Janet Irvin, who is the Chief Marketing Officer, as well as Christine Eubanks, who is Director and Senior Strategist. Today, we are discussing why we should retire the idea work-life balance. Years ago, when you heard the term employee wellness, it used to mean offering comprehensive healthcare benefits. But more recently, things have changed and now have expanded beyond just physical health. Companies have been offering support programs for mental, emotional, and financial health too. So, Janet, I thought we could start with you. Last week, you were a speaker at an adventures conference, and you mentioned that you received a reaction from the crowd when you said, work life balance is an idea that should be permanently retired. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, the panel that I was speaking on was about limiting beliefs in business. And the thing we were speaking to is the idea that your work self and your home self should be separate. And so I made that comment that I thought work life balance was, a fallacy and that we needed to get rid of it. And there was an audible reaction in the room. People just felt so strongly about it, which surprised me. I didn't expect that. But I think it's the idea that employees and business owners now don't want to have to separate ourselves. And I think it implies this pressure, that you have to be your best self at home and your best self at work. And we should try and be our best selves everywhere we go. But the idea that we have to separate them kind of ignores the idea that life happens both places and that life isn't always balanced. And, I think we've all had those experiences before, right? Like I know I have, where something really deeply personal is happening in my own life. And I felt like I couldn't bring it to work. And that really resulted in me feeling really lonely and kind of resentful and making mistakes that I wouldn't have typically made. And then not being able to explain that, which, just sort of puts you in this circle. So I think when you separate those things for people, not only are you making it harder on employees, but you are sort of stifling the creativity and good work that happens. And I think more and more employees are just kind of done with that. They want to be able to bring their whole self everywhere they go.
Yeah, I agree. Chrissy, can you tell me about a moment when you realized that this work-life balance concept wasn't really working? And also, how have you seen a change in the workplace throughout the years?
It's a great question. I think my moment in time dates back quite a bit when my now 17-year-old was at home fending for herself during a 2-hour conference call that I was doing on a sick day. And I told her to help herself to a snack. And when I came back from my 2-hour conference call from upstairs, she had eaten all of the cheese sticks, a whole package of cheese sticks, and there were wrappers all over my house. So definitely at that moment of time, work-life balance was not working in our house.
At least she was self-sufficient, right?
She was. Yeah. Couldn't be mad, just worried about all that cheese. But so yeah, I think that it is hard to expect that you can do two things equally at once in balance. I think the idea of rhythm is probably the better way of looking at things, is being able to go with the flow, in either way, and be fully supported, when your family or your personal life needs you, and and then make allowances when work needs you, and find that rhythm and that in a healthy way. So definitely, see more and more of that changing. I think I think prior to the pandemic, we saw that show up, that acceptance of that idea show up, in different businesses based on the culture of the business. But post pandemic, I think it's a more widely accepted idea. But there is a little bit of let's get back to normal. And I think that's an idea that needs to, be left, in the past, and embrace things differently as we go forward.
Yes, I agree. The pandemic definitely changed a lot of things because a lot of us just had Zoom to communicate. So it's like technically we are home right now, So like when we're on the cameras, the laundry might go off or like the doorbell might ring. So it's kind of hard to like separate those things. And Janet, in the blog post, I love how you mentioned that word, just like having grace.
Having grace. Well, and I think, so I think two things. So I think pandemic really has changed things. I think some businesses have changed for the better, but then there's also the fact that employees, especially working parents, especially working moms, have left the workplace in droves and they've not come back in because they didn't have those choices. So some businesses like ours were able to accommodate and were flexible and like embrace that, and others didn't or couldn't. And I think we're still going to see the effects of that for a long time.
And I think I would add to something you said earlier, Janet, too, about, wanting to be, not wanting to have to be different at work than at home. And I think when you can show up as yourself authentically, no matter where you are, because you're accepted for who you are and what champion and what you believe, whether you're at home or work, it's a shift too. It hasn't always been like that. So I think it's a good shift that we're seeing more of.
Yeah.
I love that shift. Yeah, it just makes it easier too to just be yourself everywhere you go. So if the work-life balance concept doesn't work, what is the alternative?
Mm-hmm. I like to think of it as work-life integration. So the idea that we don't have a work life and a home life, we just have a life. Like the whole thing is our life. And for me, like I find a lot of meaning and purpose in my work. And I love that. I also love my kids and I love my husband and I love my garden and like books and my friends. I mean, I have this whole like rich set of life and I can't separate it because all of it informs the other pieces, right? Like all of it makes me like a creative whole person. So for me to check this half of myself at the door, like you're also limiting what I can do even at work and the things I bring to it. So I think the more we integrate life and recognize that sometimes work needs a lot out of you, like we've all had those times where we're working really hard to meet deadlines or trying to achieve a goal, and that's good, like that's great. And then we have those times, today I missed a half day for preschool graduation because my son needed me, and like that's valuable too. So I think when we can like lean into those things and just show up as our whole selves, it changes business and life for the better.
I agree. And I think, how, as a leader in a company, how do we do that? How do we manage that? And there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about how important it is during, the shift in the way that we do work to be really clear about our goals and objectives and the needed outcomes that we're trying to accomplish, and to focus on those versus on activity, number of hours sitting at a desk in a certain building. It really needs to be more about what are we trying to accomplish. And if we can do that efficiently and collaboratively and successfully, then, it doesn't matter what time of the day you accomplished it. It doesn't matter what day of the week you accomplished it. So I think we just have to be more open to looking at the way, we set objectives and expectations.
And trust, right? Like I think we noted, some of the research we did for the Profit and Purpose report said this, that Gen Z especially is considered the founder generation. So I think younger employees especially want to be able to own and drive their work, and will show up in those ways if we have the trust and space to let them do it that way. Chrissy.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes, I agree. So I know Chrissy, you just mentioned, one tip that, organizations can keep in mind. But what are some other practical tips that companies and or organizations can take away?
Well, so I think there's several things, right? So one of my fellow panelists, Charlene Sarjenko, kept saying this, that healthy whole leaders make healthy decisions for their business. So I think one practical thing is just to take care of yourself as a leader, because typically teams follow the example set by the leader. So that's one thing I would say is like, what are you doing to take care of yourself and refill yourself and keep that energy going? The second thing I would say is just ask your employees what they need. And I think if you can build that into the rhythms, I think at Next Stage, we always do a check-in at the beginning of meetings, like how is everybody showing up that day? And another job I had, like we built it into a weekly one-on-one meeting template. So every meeting ended with, where are you? Are you in the growth zone, the comfort zone, the panic zone? And it opened the door for the employee to share whatever they wanted to. So it didn't have to be deeply personal. It could be great news or hard news or whatever it was, but it sort of let people show up and acknowledge that people aren't robots and bring kind of different things to the table at different times. So I thought that one was great. Uh, and then the third one, and Candace, you did a blog about this a couple of weeks ago, but I think there's really interesting ways for businesses and nonprofits, but to partner with other nonprofits and organizations. So when our team was kind of burnt out at the end of last year, we engaged with Youth Meditation, which is a nonprofit here in Charlotte. And they did 8 weeks of meditation for us every Friday, which was amazing. And also let us get to know this really cool nonprofit in Charlotte that's doing great work. And I think that can look like all sorts of things. It could look like meditation. It could look like some sort of health and wellness. It could look like team building. I think it really depends on what your company and organization kind of wants out of that experience. But there's so many good organizations that it's just another great way to partner with local nonprofits as well.
Yes, those are great points. I love that point about, we're not robots. Even when things happen in the world, I love that we check in and like, how's everyone doing today? Because rather than just pretending that we are robots and like nothing's going on outside the world or in our personal lives. So that's a great point, Janet. All right. Well, thank you, Chrissy and Janet, for joining me today. And I'm sure our viewers, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure they will walk away with something from this conversation and just learn how they can better, integrate their work selves and their home selves together. I hope you would join us next time for another episode of Backstage with Next Stage, and we will see you then.